Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Magnificent Middle Grade Books from Random House Children's Books. I'm Sarah Hunter, Books for Youth Editor at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Also, Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned above. From there, you can select Show or Hide Subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting Subtitle Settings. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Emma Otheguy, author of Sofia, Acosta Makes a Scene, Tae Keller, author of Jennifer Chan is Not Alone, Olugbemisola Rhuday-Perkovich, author of Operation Sisterhood, and Lisa Yee, author of MAIZY CHEN'S Last Chance. We'll begin the program with a brief presentation from each author, and then we'll move to the Q&A portion of the program. First, we'll hear from Emma Otheguy. Emma is the author of the middle grade novel Silver Meadows Summer and the bilingual picture book Marty's Song for Freedom. Emma holds a PhD in history from New York University, where she focused on colonial Latin America and graduated from Swarthmore College, sold books at an independent bookstore, and taught elementary school Spanish. She lives in New York City with her family. Visit her online at emmaotheguy.com. Thanks for joining us, Emma.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. So I'm here to talk about my new book, Sofia Acosta Makes a Scene, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about the inspiration for this book. When I was a kid, my parents threw an enormous party. All of my cousins and my tios and tias came to our house, which was in the suburbs of New York City. It was a little town and, kind of a little house too. And what do you think happened? Yeah, it turns out that suburban plumbing is not designed to accommodate 200 of your nearest and dearest primos. There was water everywhere. And I tell you this so that you see that there were parts of my childhood and my home life that I didn't want to talk about at school. My family was one of very few Latin families in our hometown, and I felt like to belong, to deserve to live where I did, I needed to have something that was really special or important about me. One place where I did feel a sense of belonging was at ballet. I danced classical ballet at the local dance school. And I learned there that Alicia Alonso, the Cuban prima ballerina absoluta, had danced with American ballet theaters. In fact, she was one of the founding members of ABT. So this was something so Cuban and so New York, all at the same time. There was one little problem with me and ballet, which is that my sister was actually the one who was really good at dance. I can't follow the music. I can't keep a rhythm to save my life. But I loved the costumes and the music and the drama and the storytelling of ballet. And if you look at the cover of Sofia Acosta Makes a Scene, you'll see some elements that speak to that. You'll see how Sofia loves to sew and make costumes for ballet, despite the fact that she is not a dancer in a family of dancers. So these are some of the things that inspired Sofia Acosta Makes a Scene, some of those fragments of memories that came together to make this book. It's a book about immigration history, about housing justice, about growing up Latina, and of course about ballet. Sofia Acosta is 10 years old. She is in the 5th grade at Pine Hill Elementary School, which is also this little town in the suburbs of New York City. And her class is throwing a party. They're throwing a party for her teacher, who is an immigrant from Ireland and just became a United States citizen. Now, at the same time, Sofia's parents, who are ballet teachers, they once upon a time, many years ago, were dancers with the Ballet Nacional de Cuba and danced under the prima ballerina Alicia Alonso. They are getting ready to welcome friends of theirs who are going to dance in a special performance with American Ballet Theater. And one of those friends decides to defect and to stay in the United States. And when that happens, Sofia starts to hear things about the way her neighbors think about immigration that she doesn't want to know about them. She hears them say things like, "We don't want outsiders moving here." And she realizes that there's a difference between how European immigrants and Latin immigrants in her community are treated. She starts learning about immigration history, about Ellis Island, about the quota system, about family reunification. If you're in a school that is teaching an immigration unit in the 4th or the 5th grade, I really, really want you to read Sofia Acosta Makes a Scene with your class or your library and write to me and tell me about it. I promise I will write back. I'll be really excited. The reason that's so important to me is because when I learned about immigration history in school, we learned all about Ellis Island, all about the Dear America narrative, but Latin history was entirely left out of that conversation. And of course, Latin people make up 25% of the United States. Some of us are immigrants and some of us are not. But it has always been unusual to me that we teach immigration without centering Latinidad, which is why I want you to read Sofia Acosta Makes a Scene in dialogue with immigration. So in the end, this is a book about how Sofia becomes an advocate for herself. She has to speak up to her parents and tell them that she doesn't want to be a ballet dancer. And she has to speak up for the people that she loves. She becomes an advocate for a new housing development, an apartment building that will be immigrant serving, that will be affordable in a community that really doesn't want that development to be built. And so in this little town, in the suburbs, where everything is supposed to be manicured and perfect, and where you're supposed to talk about a commitment to diversity, but not actually do anything, this is a book about how Sofia Acosta learns to make a scene. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much, Emma. Next, we'll hear from Tae Keller. Tae is the Newbery Award-winning and New York Times bestselling author of When You Trap a Tiger and The Science of Breakable Things. She was born and raised in Honolulu, where she grew up on purple rice, spam musubi, and her halmoni stories. After high school, she moved in search of snow and now lives in Seattle. Take it away, Tae.
Hi. So first of all, Emma, that was really great. I'm really excited about your book and really cool to hear you talk about it. Okay, so Jennifer Chan Is Not Alone is about a girl named Mallory. And all Mallory wants to do is survive middle school. And she knows that the best way to survive middle school is to fit in. And for her, it's the summer before 7th grade. And so far, so good. She's managed to become friends with the popular girls. And it really seems like it'll be smooth sailing as long as nothing goes wrong. But of course, something goes wrong. And that something comes in the form of a girl named Jennifer Chan. Jennifer is a girl who moves in across the street from Mallory. And right away, Mallory is drawn to her because Jennifer is different. And Jennifer isn't afraid to be herself, and she's not worried about fitting in. And the most different thing about Jennifer is that she fully believes in aliens. She believes that aliens exist, and she's going to be the first person ever to make contact with them. And she really thinks that aliens are going to come and save humanity from this world where we have to deal with pandemics and climate change and just general uncertainty. So Mallory's really drawn to Jennifer, but she's also afraid of Jennifer because Mallory knows that as soon as the school year starts, her popular friends are not really going to get along with Jennifer. And that proves to be true when everyone gets back to school and Mallory's friends start to bully Jennifer. And in order to fit in, Mallory starts to bully Jennifer as well. And all of this bullying kind of escalates into a confrontation that Mallory dubs the incident. And the day after the incident, Jennifer Chan goes missing. So this book is told in 2 different timelines. It's the past timeline with all of this escalation eventually leading to the incident, and also the present timeline where Jennifer has gone missing and Mallory is trying to find her. She's trying to find out where Jennifer went and also why, whether she ran because of what Mallory and her friends did, or if she actually managed to find aliens. So of course, this is a book about bullying and it's a book about aliens, but at its core, this is really a book about asking really big questions. These questions about what is out there, whether aliens exist, whether we're alone in the universe, but also questions about what's in here and questions about how do we be a person? And is it possible to be a good person? And can we do that in a world that feels so scary and at times so uncertain? And of course, as the author, I don't know the answers to these questions, but my hope, I guess, is that, you know, in writing it and then for the kids who are reading it, I can kind of feel like a conversation, like we're sitting down and exploring these questions together and kind of asking, when was a time where you hurt someone? And when was a time where you helped someone? And how do we be the best possible versions of ourselves? So that is Jennifer Chan is Not Alone.
Thank you so much, Tae. Our next presenter is Olugbemisola Rhuday-Perkovich. Olugbemisola is the author of many acclaimed books for young readers, including the upcoming May Makes a Way and Saving Earth, The Climate Crisis and the Fight for Our Future. She is the co-author of the middle grade novel Two Naomis, which was nominated for an NAACP Image Award, and its sequel, Naomi's 2. Inspired by some of her favorite family stories and the city she loves, Operation Sisterhood is a celebration of the sweetness and spice of sisterhood. Olugbemisola is a member of the Brown Bookshelf and a former board member of We Need Diverse Books. She lives with her family in New York City, where she writes, makes things, and needs to get more sleep. Thanks for joining us, Olugbemisola.
Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. And Emma and Tae, I'm so excited about your stories. I can't wait to read them. I love hearing authors talk about their process and their creations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the inspiration for Operation Sisterhood and read from the author's note, because that really talks about my inspiration. Operation Sisterhood is about Bo, who is a girl who's pretty sure she knows exactly who she is and exactly what she wants in and out of her life. And she's suddenly thrown into a new family situation that is very different than what she's known. A lot of people in the house, a lot of animals in the house, it's loud, there's a lot of music, and she really has to figure out when to be flexible and when to set boundaries. And the book itself is really a celebration of family, of community, and really an exploration of offering kids the opportunity to be who they are, giving them room to be, to explore, to change their minds about things, to set boundaries, and to take risks and be flexible. So from my author's note, I loved stories about big, happy families when I was growing up. My own family was big in its way across the African diaspora, but very, very spread out. We had a few large gatherings on holidays and special occasions when our travels allowed. We moved a lot. I was in a different school for every grade. I longed to be constantly squeezed together around the piano, singing and laughing, devouring rice and peas and plantain, and just eating the icing off of black cake. My parents were immigrants from Jamaica and Nigeria. I rarely have those big gathering experiences that I read about, or the matching t-shirt family reunion things that my friends in the US seem to have all the time. And while I had a perfectly good little sister, I guess, there were a number of years when I asked my parents to get us twins for Christmas. Sure, a little sister was fun to boss around and forced to watch my cooking show, forced to take the lessons I would give, and I would force her to be in my dance school. And I would always get her to ask for the things that my parents had already said no to. So I thought that it would be really magical, really, really magical to have two little sisters who could do double the things that I wanted. And then another sister my age that I could hang out with and be friends with. Unfortunately, our parents never saw it the same way. But fortunately, they did see that nothing could replace the magic of New York City. And I feel like New York City itself is a character in Operation Sisterhood. Growing up, my mom taught us how to take advantage of all the free of charge magic that New York City has to offer. I booed during amateur night at the Apollo. I explored the Harlem of Rosa Guy and Walter Dean Myers. I cheered Nelson Mandela on 125th Street. I explored the Lower East Side penny candy and pickle barrels from the books that I read, like All of a Kind Family. Operation Sisterhood is a celebration of all of those wonderful galaxies that New York City contains. And finally, it's a love letter to my daughter and all Black girls who long for room to be, to discover and rediscover themselves, to laugh until they fall on the floor, to cry and be vulnerable, to be righteously angry, to the ones who need a quiet corner every now and then, and the ones who claim center stage. It's for all readers who deserve our loving care, our listening ears, our grace, tears, cheers, and who deserve to be seen and loved just as they are.
Thank you so much, Olugbemisola. Our final presenter today is Lisa Yee. Lisa's debut novel, Millicent Men, Girl Genius, won the prestigious Sid Fleischman Humor Award. Lisa is a former Thurber House children's writer in residence whose books have been chosen as an NPR Best Summer Read, a Sports Illustrated Kids Hot Summer Read, and a USA Today Critics Top Pick. Thanks for being here, Lisa.
Am I here? There I am. Okay. If any of you who know me know that I'm not really good at tech, so it's amazing that I'm here. And also, I want to tell you guys that there is construction going on upstairs. So if you hear like a loud boom, it's not me falling out of the chair. But anyway, we're here to talk about books and not me falling out of chairs. So MAIZY CHEN'S Last Chance is, well, it's a book of my heart. MAIZY is an 11-year-old girl from Los Angeles, California, and this is me, MAIZY's age, and I'm from Los Angeles, California. And what happens is that MAIZY's grandfather gets ill, and so MAIZY and her mother travel to Last Chance, Minnesota, a place that MAIZY has never been to. In fact, she's never even met her grandparents. She met them one time, but just very briefly. And she thinks that her summer is just going to be the worst ever because, I mean, Last Chance, Minnesota, right? Her grandparents own a Chinese restaurant called the Golden Palace. And it's been in the family for generations and generations. And MAIZY spends the summer kind of babysitting her grandfather who's ill and working in the restaurant. But while she's there, she starts noticing things. Like in the back room in the kitchen, there's this wall, and on the wall are dozens of pictures, black and white, old pictures of Chinese men, young Chinese men. And when she asks, who are they? Nobody will tell her who they are. And then she starts noticing that her mother and her grandmother aren't really speaking. And she asks why, and nobody will tell her. And so the more questions she has, the more questions she has. And then what happens is that MAIZY's family is the only family of color in Last Chance, and MAIZY's the only, obviously the only, Asian kid. And so she starts getting bullied a bit, but she kind of brushes it off. But when the Chinese restaurant gets targeted with a hate crime, MAIZY realizes something's going on. She's going to find out who did this and why. And at the same time, her grandfather starts opening up to her and telling her stories about her great-great-grandfather, Lucky Chan, who came over to America when he was just 16 years old, not that much older than MAIZY, to work on the railroads. And then later he worked in a house in a mansion as a cook where he was accused of a crime he didn't commit. So he fled and he ended up in Last Chance, Minnesota, and he ended up running the Golden Palace restaurant. So all this is going on with MAIZY. She's learning about who she is, who her family is, and suddenly Last Chance isn't so boring after all. But the reason I started writing the book was I had questions about my own family, and this is my mother's family when she was little. That's my mom. And my grandparents came over in the 1920s. And so I started asking questions of my mother. And it's interesting because when we're kids and our parents want to tell us about their childhood, I don't know about you guys, but I was like, no, I don't want to hear this boring, But now all I want to do is ask questions and find out. So I started researching and I started talking to people, but I also started traveling. I went to Minnesota. Last Chance is a place that I made up, but Minnesota is an actual state. So I went to Minnesota and I started visiting these small towns and as many Chinese restaurants as I could. And at one point I came across this building in the middle of a small town. You know, it was a really tiny town. And I was wondering, like, this building, it says museum. Why is it a museum? So I went inside, I found out that that was the last place, the last bank that Jesse James robbed. And so I worked that into the story. So we have a parallel story of Maisie's great-great-grandfather, and then we have Maisie's story at the present. And suddenly things start to merge because of the hate crimes that were committed upon Chinese back then and the hate crimes that are happening now. But it's not all that. There's a lot of joy and fun in the book. Maisie likes to observe people in the restaurant. Her grandfather has taught her how to play poker, so she reads the restaurant like you would read a poker table. And she starts writing Chinese fortunes for them and slipping them into the cookies. And so one of them, she wrote, she observed this man and he had a really bad haircut, and she wrote, "It will grow back," to the man whose wife accidentally cut off too much of his hair. And well, you know, we have this thing called COVID. And so in the beginning, nobody was going out. And I said to my husband, "Hey, would you like me to cut your hair?" And he's like, "Oh, sure, I'd love it." And so I did. And that's what it looked like. And so that worked its way into the book. And I'm here to say that hair grows back, and that I'm hoping that the man who got that fortune understood that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. So now we're at the panel portion of the webinar. So I would invite everybody to turn their cameras on, and I will turn my camera on as well, and we will get to the questions. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. So I'm going to start out pretty generally. What draws you to a middle grade audience? And Tae, how about we start with you on this one?
Sure. I love this question. So I didn't think that I would be writing middle grade. I wrote a bunch of practice books before my first book actually came out, and that was always young adults. So that was for high schoolers and teenagers. And then kind of on a whim, I started writing what eventually became The Science of Breakable Things. And immediately when I was writing that, it just felt so different to be writing that book. And I think that was because I was tapping into this version of myself before, you know, I had built up all of these walls and kind of removed myself from this immediate emotional reaction that I kept having in middle school. And when I was able to tap into that version of myself, I found that my writing was a lot more honest. And I always think about kind of middle school and middle grade as this in-between time when, you know, kids are moving out of childhood, but they're not yet adults. And so they're starting to really ask these questions about their place in the world and how they fit, but they haven't yet built these defenses. And so they're dealing with all of these big questions and wondering all of these things in a way that is so immediate and so vulnerable. And that's why I think that having books for that age is so important.
Emma, how about you? What drew you to this age group?
Yeah, you know, Tae, I think you really spoke to the idea of that they are in the middle, right? They're in between two very distinct phases of childhood and of development. And I think that what I love about that middle stage is that children have all of the middle grade readers, I think, have all of the sweetness and integrity that is so unique to childhood, but they're old enough to have a voice. So in Sofia Acosta Makes a Scene, I alluded to this in my introduction, you know, there's this fight going on about an apartment building. It's a suburban town, mostly single family homes. People are very upset about this apartment building, and they're saying things like, well, it's one thing in the city, but in this town, I moved here because I thought it would be better for my kids to grow up in a place that was small or in a place that, you know, had only single family homes. And the adults are making this argument about kids. And so Sofia, it doesn't come easy to her, but it is a part of her process. She realizes that she's actually in a unique position to advocate and to speak to that issue because she is a child, and she can say things like, actually, this isn't better for children. This might be better for some children, but that exclusionary housing policies were not developed to benefit me also a child. And she's able to call out her neighbors. And I think that that's something that middle grade readers are just in a really good position to do because they have that integrity and because they already are developing a voice and they can speak to children's issues really authentically.
Olugbemisola, you were nodding while she was talking. What drew you to middle grade audiences? What was resonating with you and what Emma was saying?
I mean, I think everything that both Emma and Tae said resonated. I definitely thought about myself becoming a middle grade writer from childhood even. So that period of reading was really, really precious for me and just really important to me. I mentioned that we moved a lot when I was a kid. So I was in a different school every grade. I was very, very shy. And I had a lot of books. We weren't allowed to watch very much TV, but we could read as much as we wanted and go to the library as much as we wanted. And so I read a lot, and books for me were a way to sort of work life out and sort of figure things out and even try things out in some ways that I couldn't necessarily actually do at the time. And also as I got older or old, in working with young people in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade in book clubs and book groups, it's so helpful to use books and literature to sort of talk through some big issues or everyday little issues in a way that's comfortable and is a little less scary. It can be so hard, whether you're really shy or not, to sort of articulate sometimes how you're feeling and what you're thinking as a kid to an adult or to your peers. And I think literature is such a great way to engage and develop empathy, develop more curiosity in that middle grade period. It's so special to me.
Lisa, how about you? What draws you to middle grade?
Well, if I can be honest, I peaked in middle grade. So it's like, okay, after that, it's all over. So that's why I always want to go back to middle grade when I was at my best. But when I was writing my first book, Millicent Man, Girl Genius, I didn't know about middle grade and upper elementary and all that kind of stuff. And I kept asking my editor, Arthur Levine, because I come from a TV and advertising background. I kept saying, what are the demographics? And what is my target? And he actually yelled at me and said, just write the story. Just write the story. And so I just wrote that story, and I was surprised that it was middle grade. Then I thought, oh, maybe it's an adult level. I didn't know. And so that's how I kind of approach things now. It's like, even though now I haven't, I know what middle grade is, I know what YA is, but I focus on the story and know that it'll find its place. But what I do now also is I have a reader in mind while I'm writing. And generally it's either myself at that age or one of my kids at that age. And as I'm writing, I'm thinking, okay, how are they going to react to this? How will they do that? And when I go into schools and do school visits, it's just so amazing because, they'll group the students by grades. And so, if you've ever talked to high school kids, oh, scary, but when you get those middle schoolers and you get, especially you get those 5th graders and they're leaning forward in their chair and they're interested and they're engaging and they're not too jaded yet. And they're not embarrassed to show that they love hearing what you're talking about and talking to you. And to me, it's like, I don't know, it's just the best feeling.
You've all sort of alluded to this in your answer to this question, but all of your books deal with big changes in friendship and family dynamics. And this is a really potent topic, obviously, for middle school and middle grade readers in general. But I'm wondering what draws you to that particular topic, why your books focus so much on that for this grade range in particular. And Emma, can we start with you on this one?
Sure. So it's interesting because when I started Sofia Acosta Makes a Scene, I knew I wanted it to be about a girl who feels very uncertain about her place in her own family. So the Acostas are ballet dancers. They were very successful ballet dancers. Dance is the way that they've managed to become successful in the United States. It's the reason they were able to get visas and eventually get residence and, you know, become citizens of the United States. So dance has kind of been this really important thing in her family, and she's not a dancer. So I knew it was going to be like, she's a ballet dancer or she's in this family of ballet dancers, but she doesn't feel like she's a ballet dancer. And then the bottom falls out in her friendships because she realizes that actually she had been leaning on her friends instead of her family. But then she realizes that her friends have really different ideas about immigration and have views that she finds unacceptable, and that they don't really accept the full spectrum, the full embodiment of her Latinidad. So it's both of those things. And I think in my own life, friendship and family have always kind of woven in and out, you know, like one is up and one is down. And, you know, it's like when your family's a mess, you have your friends, and when your friends are a mess, you have your family. And so for Sofia, it really becomes about how she's able to realize that her family is about more than ballet talent, and realize that what ties her family together is actually about their shared values, about their experiences, like their love of Cuban culture. It's about, you know, the black beans, the rice, about the dance in the social sense. And so it's really that evolution that she makes for how she comes to understand what it means to belong in her family. And I went through a very similar process. I mean, I grew up feeling, and I've spoken about this before, feeling oftentimes very, you know, a strong sense of shame or of not belonging, of feeling very disconnected, not disconnected, but feeling like there was a separation between my Latina identity and my, the way in which I moved in the broader world when I had to be a part of a dominant culture. And so I've always been interested in all my writing in different ways to address what that's like to have such a different life at home than the one you have at school. And then what does it mean if you don't fit in with your family either? Then where do you belong?
Olugbemisola, I'm curious about what you think specifically about changing family dynamics, since that's such a huge component of your book.
Yeah, it's funny. I found some actual typewritten pages of a story called Sisters that I had started writing maybe in the 90s. I don't even know. That is clearly like Operation Sisterhood sort of precursor, preamble kind of work. And I think I thought about it a lot in those middle grade years myself, because I would read those books, like the Shoes books by Noel Streatfeld and the Melendi family books. I would read and really love those books, but I also felt very acutely that there were either no Black families in those stories, or there weren't stories like that about Black families. And I felt like, but I know that there are joyful Black people, and I know from my family experience, there are these kind of experiences, but they're not in stories. So I would literally sort of write myself into those stories, or write my versions of those stories with those characters and me, like, in the story. So that's definitely a big part of it. And with Operation Sisterhood also, I was writing it the bulk of it during some really not joyful times. So during COVID in New York City, it was really, really sad and just really hard. And there was a lot of violence against Black communities over the last few years. And at some points, I really struggled with trying to tell this very joyful story, but I was thinking so much about what I wanted to give readers because of everything that was going on. And that I wanted to give readers something joyful. I wanted kids in New York City to still, and other readers to sort of understand that New York City is not necessarily what they see on TV or in film, that there are communities here, that there is a sense of family, there is a warmth and a joy in the middle of incredible diversity that's really, really beautiful and powerful. And that you can, and I have, because I'm a child of immigrants from 2 different countries, because I'm a New Yorker, because I have so many different identities, and sometimes thought that maybe I had to put some aside at times, or I could only share certain ones. And I think in the book, Bo is kind of learning that it's okay to have all these different identities and share them all, that you can be all of who you are and it's okay. And all of the girls are sort of learning that in different ways, expressing that in different ways, and understanding that your community can love and respect you, your family can love and respect you, all of who you are.
Yeah, that's such a nice realization and so important, I think, for kids in that age group too. I'm thinking a lot, Tae, about your book and how the friendship dynamic change is so integral to your plot. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I love that idea of changing identities and trying to figure out how to claim multiple identities, and also how that shift in identity fits in with the relationships that you already have, and how that fundamentally can change the relationship. Like, Emma, how you were talking about how Sofia's friends don't really understand her identity and how that really causes a lot of conflict. I think that's so interesting, and so much defines that age, is the way that those relationships with family and friends, they evolve, and some of them strengthen and some of them weaken and some of them entirely fall apart. And having all different books about different kinds of relationships is so important, to have kind of like a roadmap for kids to how to deal with this. When I think about writing about friendship for middle grade, I think a lot about how friendships were so important to me in middle school, and the social dynamic was so important. And I think that can be kind of easy to forget as an adult, because, like, maybe we don't get along with a coworker, but we are, we've been around longer, so we have ways to deal with that. And also we have our own work, and we don't have to constantly be interacting with that person. But it does feel different for kids in school sometimes, because they're in a class from 8 to 3, and sometimes they're sitting right next to this kid that they have conflict with, and they have to navigate the cafeteria and PE and all of these spaces and moments where the social dynamic matters so much. So when I write about friendships and about these conflicts, I always want to think about who I was when I was in middle school, and not dismiss the importance of those relationships. And kind of, I remember getting a lot of advice like, oh, just separate yourself from that. Don't even worry about it. Don't think about it. But really, that can be very challenging for kids. And so I think when I'm writing about these shifting relationships, I'm always thinking about, how can I be really honest about that difficulty there, and really meet kids where they're at, and try to offer hope and a way to get through it, but also just acknowledgement that it can be really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lisa, in your book, so much of your main character's journey seems to be one of like enrichment in her own understanding of herself and her family, and she uncovers all of these like dynamics, and that's an interesting kind of changing dynamic to me that I wonder if you could speak to a little bit, just like discovery of self as a core driver of your story.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember reading one time in a review, it said Lisa Yee always writes about family. And I remember reading and thought, do I? And then I looked at all my books like, oh, I guess I do. I didn't realize that, but that's a constant theme of mine. But in MAIZY CHEN'S LAST CHANCE, when she was living in Los Angeles with a single mother, that was her entire family, because her mother had been estranged from the grandparents. And then suddenly she's in this town where not only is she with her grandparents for the first time, but she finds out that that wall of pictures of these men are what's called paper sons. And paper sons are a part of history that, and unless you're Chinese American, probably a lot of people don't know about. But there was a law forbidding Chinese to come to America. They allowed maybe about 150 a year at that time. So what the Chinese would do is they would have documents stating that they were part of another person's family. and they were sponsored. And if you had a relative here and were sponsored, you could come over. And so they were called a paper son. So what Maisie is learning is not only about her own family, but all these families that came over that started in China and that they came over here. And she learned that, like, these people on the wall, their names, that wasn't even their name, because they had to change the name to match the family that sponsored them. So, you know, in the story, it's a combination of Maisie finding out about herself, her grandparents, her mother, her own family, and then connecting all these paper sons. And so, you know, I always like put one word. I always assign my main character one word. And when I'm writing, I refer back to it. And Maisie's word was bridge, because what she was is a bridge in the town and her own family and generationally. And she has this strength that she didn't know that she had to be able to do this and to connect people and generations and times and locations. And I think that so many of our readers, it's the same way. They're stronger than they realize. They have more power than they realize. And hopefully when they're reading all of our books, they can identify with some of the characters and say, hey, you know, maybe that's me too.
That's a very nice segue into my next question, which is about renegotiating how you communicate with adults in all of your books, because that was a really interesting dynamic to me as well. I think one of the things that's really key to gaining independence is figuring out how to talk to an adult on their terms and on your terms at the same time. And that's something that I felt made its way through all of your novels in an interesting way. Olugbemisola, can you speak to that a little bit? How did you figure out how your young characters would interact with adults in your books?
Yeah, it was an interesting challenge for me, because Bo really, she's very close to her mom. It's been her and her mom. That's pretty much all she knows. And then she knows that her mom is wanting to do all these things for her because she loves her and wants to offer all of these things to her because she loves her. And she even knows, like, okay, a lot of this may be good, but I don't really know if it's for me. But she doesn't want to hurt her mom's feelings. She doesn't want to hurt her mom. She likes seeing her mother happy. And so she really does struggle with sort of expressing sort of like, okay, I actually don't want to do swimming and tennis and drama and all these things that you really want me to do that are great, but they're just not me. And I really struggled with that as a kid, just sort of, I really didn't talk to my parents about what I was thinking or how I was feeling about things. I have a daughter who's much better than I am at that and sort of saying that, but I know it's still a struggle for her because of power dynamics in relationships. And I try to recognize that in my writing, that I know that kids can struggle with it. And also that some kids, I remember as a kid sort of seeing some friends who had a very different dynamic with the adults in their lives and being like shocked, like, whoa, how did they just get away with speaking like that to an elder? And I want to sort of recognize the challenges, and through story, and I think in this book, because Bo listens and because she figures out how to communicate that's in a way that's comfortable for her, I would like readers to sort of see, like, the communication is important, that you can, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can say how you feel in a loving and respectful way. And you can also be quiet if you're not ready to talk about something, or if you don't feel comfortable talking about something. You have that, you are empowered to sort of figure this out in your own way.
Yeah. Lisa, I'm thinking a lot about the different ways that Maisie figures out how to communicate with the adults in her family. I wonder if you could talk about how she finds a way to make herself heard in your book.
Yeah, in the beginning, when Maisie first gets to Last Chance, you know, again, she hasn't seen her grandparents. She only met her grandparents one time, and it was years earlier for about 5 minutes. And So she sees her grandfather, and he looks scary to her because he's ill, he's in a wheelchair, he's aged, and she doesn't know how to talk to him. But then she finds out that he's hysterical. He likes to tell jokes. He becomes almost like her best friend. And so they start communicating, and then the barriers come down in terms of who she initially viewed him as and who he really is, especially when he teaches her how to play poker and starts telling stories about her great-great-grandfather, Lucky Chan, who came over generations earlier. And so MAIZY learns that talking with her grandfather is actually the key to learning more about her family and to get these stories about this amazing person, Lucky Chan, who initially starts out as a character in a story to her, but then becomes more real when she sees evidence of his life in the Golden Palace. And then also she's always had a good relationship with her mother. So she's used to talking to adults, but especially though when she starts working in the Golden Palace restaurant, and she's working there and she's helping out at the restaurant, and she's actually taking orders and doing all this stuff. And so she's forced to come out of her shell a little bit and interact with people. And when she's doing that, she learns that it's actually really easy to talk to adults, and especially if you ask them questions, because they like to talk about themselves.
That's a good fact for middle schoolers to learn, I think. Tae, how about you? How did you think about renegotiating communication with parents and adults in your novel?
So I very vividly remember the first time that I lied to my mom about where I was going to be. And I think that she's watching this webinar, so sorry, Mom. But I remember I was in 7th grade, and I remember calling her and saying, I have to work late on a school project. But I wasn't doing anything bad. I was just like hanging out with my friends for an extra hour. But it felt so big to me. It felt like, oh my gosh, like it was this thrill that I had pulled one over on my mom, but also kind of this almost heartbreak that even at the time I was like, something has really changed. Like I will be forever different because I'm someone who lies to my mom. And I just remember that shifting relationship. But I also remember how important that relationship was for me in middle school when I was having trouble with friends, and when my mom was someone that I could really talk to. And I was starting to understand that she wasn't just this person who could comfort me, but also was maybe a real person who could relate to having conflict with other people. And so there was a lot of ways that that relationship was changing. And so I'm always really fascinated about how to bring that into my books, about the ways that that parental relationship shifts so much. I also think as a writer, there's this challenge with parents sometimes, because this is a book about kids who are investigating a missing person and are trying to communicate with aliens and are just generally getting into a lot of shenanigans. And parents don't really want their kids to be breaking into radio stations trying to send radio signals to aliens. And so there's this challenge as a writer of, okay, how do I, keep these kids keeping the plot going, but also keep that relationship with the parents really central to the story. And I knew that I wanted to eventually make Mallory's parents really important for her finding Jennifer. And so I wanted to show the ways that Mallory's having conflict with her mom, but eventually comes back together with her mom and finds that her mom is actually an ally and someone who can really help support her instead of just, preventing her from doing all the fun, interesting things. So I always think that parental relationship is really, really interesting in middle grade.
When Mallory texts her 7th grade friend to come pick her up in the car, I went, I was reading your book. And I was so happy that her mom came out and intervened. It was such a relief for me.
Yes.
How about Emma? How about you? So much of your book is about finding a way to speak up to parents. I'd love to hear your take on this as well.
Well, I just want to say that I just love everything everyone has just said. I mean, Tae, the way you talked about the parents and like the difficulty of writing a book with lots of shenanigans when there are parents involved. I always joke that like the most dangerous place you can be as a parent is in a middle grade novel, because like how many of our favorite books start with like the parents being in like a garish accident or horrible accident just so that they can get out of the way and shenanigans can happen. And I also just wanted to speak to, because I think it'll make us laugh, but it also comes back to the heart of the question, is Tae, you also mentioned the first time you lied to your parents or to your mom and how you remember it. And I remember the first time I lied to my parents, and I did not come back to them for like decades. So when I was a kid, I used to take ballet classes at the Joffrey Ballet School, which is in the Village, and it's right across the street from the Jefferson Market Courthouse Library. I don't know if anybody's ever been to this library. Olugbemisola, I'm guessing you've been there. It's an incredible library. It looks like a castle. And my parents were like, okay, you can take the subway to ballet class, and then you can go to either the Bagel Bob's or the library during your breaks. Those are the three places you're allowed to be. Then you have to come straight home. And I was like a very dutiful kid who always did what my parents said. And I was like, yes, I'm going to do exactly that. But like my friend Sofia Acosta, I was not like super into ballet classes. But of course, I didn't want to tell my parents that because they'd already, paid for ballet camp and everything. So what I would do was, especially during there was always like in the afternoons, like fun dance classes, like there would be like a Latin dance class and a jazz class and this and that. I would go to the Jefferson Market Courthouse Library and read. I would just sit in the children's room. I didn't have a New York Public Library card. I would just like sit in the children's room and read books. I read like every single novel Eva Ibbotson has ever written, like from, started on one end and went to the other end, just sitting in that room. I couldn't check books out. So I would have to like keep running back and missing more and more ballet classes the next day so I could keep pulling the book off the shelf and then reshelving it. And I did not tell my parents ever. And they found out when I was planning my wedding and I was trying to find a first dance song with my dad, and they realized that they had like never taught me to salsa, and they were like very upset having this realization that they had like not passed on this dance tradition to me. Because my dad was like talking about whether we should do a merengue or whether we should do this or that. And I was like, I actually know nothing about Latin dance. And they were like, why not? And then my dad was like, but we paid for you to take all those lessons, like for this reason, like to be good Cuban parents who taught you how to dance. And I was like, about all of those lessons. So yeah, I told my parents that I hadn't gone to any of those classes that they had sent me to and had been reading children's books instead when I was like 28. So that's my story. And what I wanted to say about the relationship with the parents before, when you had sent me this question, Sarah, before I had heard Tae and Olugbemisola speak, and I think that you both spoke so well to something that I think happens particularly for kids who I think are coming from any kind of experience of marginalization. I think it's particularly common among children of immigrants, is a sense of feeling the need to protect our parents, for feeling bad for our parents in some ways. I would, like you were saying, Olugbemisola, I would watch other kids like giving their parents crap about something, and I could never imagine doing that because I saw my role as protecting my parents from all the things they didn't understand, because there were things about living in the United States that even after they had lived there for, I don't know how long they lived in the country before I was born, but like they really didn't get. Protecting them from things they couldn't say. My parents have they don't have particularly pronounced accents. They have, I think, very convincing English, but like my dad especially, he sometimes says things like very slowly and articulately, and people think he's being snobby. And I feel like I'm always like having to explain, like, no, that's just the way he talks because he doesn't want to like mess up when he's speaking English. So that's the way he speaks. And so it was so hard for me to lie to my parents or to, not do what they told me to do. But it was also a part of becoming who I am and learning how to express that. And so in Sofia Acosta Makes a Scene, Olugbemisola, you also brought up activities. It's about how Sofia realizes that she can actually tell her parents that she doesn't want to dance. And when we're talking about activities, when we're talking about soccer and dance, I know it seems like small potatoes and something with very low stakes beyond the individual, but I see that conversation with the parents as a practice run for learning to speak up to other people. Because it's when Sofia is able to speak up and say to her parents, I'm not a ballerina. I don't want to dance anymore. That's not what I want it to mean to be a part of this family, which is like, to her, it feels like she's betraying the contract that you have with your parents when you are the child of immigrants. But that's when she starts to say, you know what? I am going to speak up about this apartment building, and I'm going to tell people that we should build it, because she gets to practice speaking her truth to her parents.
So I've been having such a great time listening to all of you talk. We are getting really close to the end of our webinar here. I'm going to ask one more question. And it's really pertinent to what we've been talking about. We've been talking a lot about what adults think about kids and what kids think about themselves in regards to adults. And you've probably been hearing a lot in the news that there are a lot of adults saying some stuff about what kids can and can't handle when it comes to books. And I'm really wondering if you can each speak to what you think middle grade readers lose when their access to books is limited. Lisa, can we start with you on this one?
Yes. Yeah, when I was writing MAIZY CHEN'S Last Chance, COVID was going on, and then all of a sudden there were all these Asian hate crimes happening. And for a while I felt paralyzed, and I remember just sobbing, and I couldn't write. And I thought, I want to help, but what can I do? I felt helpless. And then I realized I can finish this book, because in the book, it addresses Asian hate crimes that happened generations ago and that are happening today. And so I realized that I need to speak out about it, but also I didn't want to hit anybody over the head with it. But I would be amiss not to put that in the book, because it's part of real life. And what I'm hoping is that the readers will be able to read this, and it'll spark discussion. And already I'm hearing from people saying, this happened to me, and this happened to me, and all of this. But there are so many kids out there that aren't watching television, whose parents aren't telling them what's going on in real life. And through books, they can get a taste of what other kids are going through, especially when they identify with them. And then again, it can spark discussion, because I think the worst thing that we can do is to put blinders on and tell our children, no, you can't read that, you can't know about that. I mean, what kind of future does that give them?
Yeah. Emma, how about you? What do you think middle grade readers lose when their access to books is limited?
I think that it is our responsibility in a democratic society to provide books to children. So what I think kids lose is a fundamental right. I think that I'm speaking to librarians here, so I'm speaking to the choir, but I think kids deserve access to media, and they deserve that access in public institutions, not through, retail, not from stores, not from shopping. They deserve to be available to them. And so to me, anytime that you walk into a school or a library, into the public institutions that have made the promise to provide media to children, and it's not there, I think that's a loss of a kid's a really deep fundamental right in any society. And I mean, I think in New York State, it's like, I think in New York State, you're supposed to have a school librarian, right? It's a huge, and I don't know about other states because I don't know about politics there, but it's everything.
Mm-hmm. Tae, how about you? What do middle grade readers lose when they can't have access to books?
I mean, it's really frustrating, this hearing about the book bannings. I remember getting this question about, what can kids handle in the context of content being weighty or heavy, if it's about death or grief or, abuse, or kind of the heavier range of middle grade. And I always thought about that question as coming from a place of really genuinely trying to protect kids. And I'd always say, having books that can thoughtfully address things is better than just randomly Googling. And so that's always important. But then these conversations now about the book banning, it does not feel like it's coming from a place of protecting kids at all. It feels like it's coming from a place of trying to control kids, and specifically control their access to stories that can be, we talk about windows and mirrors, that can be reflecting their own identity and experiences, or showing them how kids who are different from them might live and experience the world, and trying to the book banning is really like limiting them to understand that difference is good and something to celebrate. And I just feel like books make our world bigger, and these conversations about banning books is just like, it feels like an attempt to make the world smaller, and that's frustrating. And I don't know what to say, except I mean, thank you to the librarians and educators who are really pushing back against this and really understand the value of these books and are working so hard to get them into kids' hands.
Yeah. Olugbemisola, I'm going to give you the last word on this question. What do you think?
I agree with what everyone said. I really think that when we deny kids access to stories, we're denying them reflections of their identities, of themselves. And I mentioned that, I was a free range reader. And so I was allowed to read all kinds of books. And I read a lot of books at ages when I didn't really understand them. I didn't fully understand them. I also was able to work out for myself what parts of books I really wanted to skip at certain times, or I knew what I could handle myself. So I think we also do need to trust readers and trust librarians and trust educators. And with writing Operation Sisterhood, I really wanted Black children to see that they are not the problem. So I think that a lot of times there is an idea when we talk about children, when we talk about Black children in particular, it is about problems, it's about a sort of pathology. It's about like a deficit mentality. And I think, and about control, as Tae talked about. And I think when we do not allow all children to have access to stories that control smaller deficit mindset is what ends up prevailing. And that is a really sad thing.
Mm-hmm. There's one thing that I've taken away from all of your novels in preparing for this webinar. It's that kids in this age group have genuine agency. And just because they, have to be driven around by their parents and not their 7th grade friend doesn't mean that they aren't capable of making decisions about what they can and can't do and what's important to them. And I really hope that I feel like it does, all of these book bannings feels like such a disservice to the personhood of children.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, we are now over time. It's been such a pleasure to talk to all of you. Thank you so much. Let me get back to my script here. Here we go. So thank you to Emma, Tae, Olugbemisola, and Lisa. It was such a treat to speak with you today. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to the certificate of completion and video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit www.booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones like those you see here. Not yet a subscriber? Pair the print reading experience with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com and lock in print, online, digital, and archive access by taking advantage of the special webinar offer to get Booklist for only $75. Patron-friendly, librarian-approved, and free with a Booklist subscription, Booklist Reader, Booklist's new digital-only magazine highlighting diverse readers' advisory recommendations for all ages, has arrived. To see and share the latest issue, visit booklistonline.com/reader-issues. Thank you again for joining us for today's webinar. One more huge, gigantic, enthusiastic thank you to our panelists and to our sponsor, Random House Children's Books. This concludes today's webinar. See you next time.